Welcome back, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce the second panel, which is called Follow the Money, Investigate Corruption, and we'll hear on-the-ground stories from investigative journalists from Ukraine and also insights from Bellingcat. But let me first introduce you to our moderator today, Alice Stolmeyer, who is the founder and executive director of Defend Democracy. She has a background in social studies of science, technology, and society. A former digital strategist, Alice now works on democracy, technology, geopolitics, and hybrid threats. Alice has lived and worked in Paris, Amsterdam, and Brussels, the heart of the European Union, where we are today. So I'm very happy to pass the floor to Alice and the second panel. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind introduction. Yes, perhaps before we kick off, so Defend Democracy, our mission is to defend and strengthen democracy against foreign, domestic, and technological threats. And corruption is, let's say, on our radar in the sense that it's a tool in the Kremlin's wider toolbox of active measures or political warfare. So hence, I'm very pleased to moderate today's great panel. I know you discussed this morning the institutional design related to the reconstruction efforts, but now we will turn our attention to investigative journalism in securing the integrity of Ukraine's reconstruction funds. So what is civil society's role as, let's say, the second line of defense against corruption in Ukraine? Our panel features leading investigative journalists from Ukraine, presenting on-the-ground stories of tracking illicit finance and investigating corruption in Ukraine, as well as insights on open-sourced investigations from Bellingcat. And I'm very pleased to introduce our esteemed panelists. I'm going from left to more left. On my left is Alisa Yushchenko. She's an investigative journalist and editor for Bihus Info in Kyiv. Since 2014, Alisa has worked at the anti-corruption video project, Bihus Info. She specializes in monitoring the oligarchs' activity and their influence on state assets, analyzing the non-public influence of top officials, as well as monitoring the work of the anti-corruption bodies of Ukraine. And she has won several journalistic investigations prizes. To the left of Alisa is Anna Mironiuk. She is an investigative journalist and head of investigations at the Kyiv Independent. Now, Anna has run investigative projects on, among others, mismanagement in Ukraine's army, human rights violations in houses for the elderly, illicit trade of tobacco. She collaborated with the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, the Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, and the Consortium of Investigative Journalists. And she has also won an impressive amount of prizes, so congratulations on that. And last but definitely not least is Ross Higgins. He's a senior researcher and investigator at Bellingcat, specializing in financial investigation and disinformation. And he has been he was the lead investigator in Bellingcat's joint report with Transparency International UK on offshore in the UK. And his latest major report, Smash and Grab, although perhaps this information is outdated, was about the UK's money laundering machine.
Yeah,
and
I have done some work since then.
I imagine. But he has also done research into the influence of the QAnon conspiracy theory in the UK. Now, that's a lot of introduction, so I'm happy to give the floor to our panelists. And maybe in the same order, tell us a bit more about what your work is with regards to the investigation of corruption and illicit finance.
Hi all. I'm glad to have the opportunity to be here speaking about my team I work with, and I'm excited to speak about our team in the context of Ukraine reconstruction, because I think it sounds very optimistic. Of course, we are the team which conduct anti-corruption investigations, but since February 24, 2022, we also started we also have been paying a lot of attention to Russian war crimes, and we started reporting from the front line. My colleague Anya Kalyuzhna right now is into the front line, making and filming video with our soldiers defending our country and filming their moods. But of course, our topic today is anti-corruption, so I should return to this question, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we are doing. So Biggest Info team was founded at 2013 when the President Yanukovych was in our country, and we managed to publish several high-level investigation about his entourage, and then he escaped from Ukraine, but we continued doing our job and monitoring how our Ukrainian taxpayers' money are used in Ukraine under Petro Poroshenko and under Zelensky. It was a short story about our team, but I want to give you a small picture about general journalistic landscape in Ukraine. I think we have in Ukraine at least 6 strong independent national-wide journalistic centers with investigative units. I said at least, but I think honestly we have even more, and a dozen more in the regions, but some of our regional investigative journalists are also here at the conference, and I know they have studied a lot to be able to find information efficiently at their regional level. And this is the reason why I believe that in Ukraine there is a solid systematic work on monitoring the movement of budget funds by journalists. And this is the reason why so many secret corruption stories have been covered in previous years. And this is also the reason why a significant part of the Ukrainians is well aware of these stories and is ready to actively respond to them. I want to add that we constantly receive feedback from our audience. A lot of people write to us every day, and then they write to ask us to check some information they know. So I think Ukrainians are not indifferent to such corruption cases. And can you imagine that even during the war, journalists are conducting anti-corruption investigation about the Ministry of Defense? Ukrainian journalists dare. I'm referring to the publication about the questionable prices of purchasing food for our army. It is a story about Ukrainian taxpayers' funds, not foreign money, but Ukrainian journalists published this story, and yesterday I released my own follow-up piece to the story, and I think we do this because we feel that we're able to make changes to better in Ukraine in this way. Due to the strong interest of Ukrainian society in anti-corruption issues, our authorities are forced to react to our materials. For example, the prices for these food contracts have already been reduced, and I think it's a good story for us. And our team also has several cases where our journalistic materials turned into criminal cases, criminal proceedings. And now they are being investigated by the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, you know, NABU. And I also want to tell you a little bit about our ability to see the flow of funds in Ukraine. Of course, bank transactions are bank secrecy, and I can't recall that it has ever been disclosed to journalists in Ukraine. But we have several services to control public finance. In Ukraine, we have a wonderful state portal called eData. It was created precisely so that government agencies would obliged to publish information about all their transactions, and every citizen can go to the website, open the ministry or state-owned enterprise of their interest, and see where it spent money and with which companies it entered into agreements. And we also have an online public procurement system. It was mentioned here already. It is called Prozoro. Tenders are held there, and you can also see there informations about state contracts and about state monies spent. So there are two key services that allow us to control the flow of funds from government agencies. And I also should say that we in Ukraine have efficient system of access to public information from government agencies through the correspondence. We have good legislation that protect our rights to receive such information. Of course, there are occasional incidents when a government agency doesn't want to provide certain information to respond to a request, but in general, this system works well, and state institutions have only 5 working days to provide any citizen of Ukraine with data created within this institution. Okay, maybe it was the main things I want to tell you. I think Anna will add something to this, and thank you for your attention.
Yeah, it does. Sorry. So hello, everybody. I'm grateful for this opportunity to be there and to speak before you about journalistic work we do in Ukraine. My name is Anna. I'm the representative of the Kyiv Independent. It's quite a young Ukrainian media outlet that was launched just a little bit more than a year before. I think 3 months before Russia invaded full scale. I will briefly walk you through the story of our creation, because I guess it's quite interesting and goes in line with what we are discussing today. So the Kyiv Independent is, so to say, a successor of the Kyiv Post. Kyiv Post used to be the oldest by far Ukrainian English language newspaper. We actually had a print. But then at some point, an oligarch owner decided to start putting some pressure on the newspaper, which ended up with us, the staff, protesting against that and saying that we will not tolerate any censorship attempts whatsoever. He didn't like that approach and showed us the doors. So he actually fired us without notice on one Monday morning. But we didn't, we didn't cry it out full on. We decided to launch our new media organization, which we called the Kyiv Independent. We weren't that creative with the name, but the word independent, I guess, speaks for itself. So we started the Kyiv Independent, and then as we were developing this new media organization, we were working around the clock to write news about Ukraine. And that was around the time when Russia was building up on Ukraine's borders with its troops. So we had a lot of work to do, many news to write. And then Russia invaded on February 24th, which provided us with many sleepless nights and many news items, as I said, to write. So basically, from that point on, we have been all focused on frontline reporting, or war reporting, and closer to summer, half a year into all-out war, we decided to launch the investigative desk, something that we have been planning on since the very creation of the Kyiv Independent, but Russian invasion unfortunately changed our plans a little bit. Still, half a year into Russian full-out war, we launched the Kyiv Independence Investigative Desk with this story. The first story we published was, I guess, the story which was among the first investigative pieces that exposed some mismanagement in the Ukrainian military during the war. The story was on how leadership of the military intelligence run wing of the International Legion, which is a formation created within the Ukrainian military for foreigners willing to defend Ukraine. So how this leadership abused its power. And the story detailed how it was done, by who, etc., etc. And we actually found a Polish convicted criminal within the leadership of this International Legion, which is, to say the least, illegal. But, so that was the first story we did, and then it kind of developed into the full-fledged investigative unit. We ran plenty of stories now in collaboration with other media organizations across the globe. And we also did a follow-up on the story about the International Legion, which we published later on in late November. This story exposed alleged leadership misconduct, which detailed how these commanders might have been behind misappropriation of light weapons and small arms. So that is us. That's what Kyiv Independent, I keep making this mistake. The Kyiv Independent has been working on. Right now, like the latest story we published was on Russia's plans to absorb Belarus, for example. We're now also working on a very interesting story today. We're gonna publish it tonight. Check the Kyiv Independence website. And also we have an investigative newsletter, which we've just recently started. We make actually, I think that might be interesting for you in the audience if you're into following up what is happening in Ukraine in terms of anti-corruption investigations, in terms of any investigative stories that might be of your interest. I would encourage you to subscribe because we do the roundup of the stories that were published in Ukrainian media during the past week. It's a weekly newsletter which provides you with an inner look of what investigative journalists in Ukraine were after the past week.
Great, thank you, Alisa and Anna. So you are doing great work on the ground, but we also have Bellingcat doing great work in open source investigations. Ross?
Yeah, hopefully so. Is my mic? Is it working now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So my name's Ross Higgins. I'm a senior researcher at Bellingcat. Senior purely because I've been there for several years. I don't actually know what the job title means. We have kind of a multi-pronged approach to Ukraine at the moment. So everything we do is open source investigation. So the material that we base our reports on is stuff that we found online in social media profiles, satellite imagery, things of that nature, public registries. So really, there are three strands to how we're working in this respect. Number one is the reports that we put out on the websites about the war. Usually, this is going to take the form of investigations into say FSB activities, or particularly egregious war crimes that we come across, and how we can kind of piece together these articles with material that's available on social media and geolocation and things like that. We have a whole justice and accountability team who are currently archiving and again geolocating incidents that are happening in Ukraine at the moment, because what we're trying to do is raise the work that we're producing to a certain evidential standard, so we can produce it in courts when the need arises. We have some experience of this with our investigations into the shooting down of flight MH17. We're hoping that by cataloguing these war crimes and working with, say, the judiciary, for example, we can make open source evidence more admissible in courts. That is a team that works separately from your typical researchers at Bellingcat, and we do not publish. We are not publishing our findings at this stage, because again, this is more of a legal matter. From my perspective, I've been writing about opaque sort of corporate structures in the UK and Ireland for several years now. We have kind of a funny situation in the UK where we have thousands and thousands and thousands of limited partnerships and limited liability partnerships that are controlled by offshore entities in places like the Seychelles and Belize. These types of partnerships have been used for a whole range of illicit purposes, but most notably the funneling of money from Eastern Europe and Russia. So, for example, the proceeds of the Moldovan bank raid were loaned to a Scottish limited partnership, which was situated in the poorest council estate in Edinburgh, to the tune of $1 billion. So I'm very interested in looking into these types of corporate structures. How that pertains to Ukraine, for example, is currently we are looking at the sanctions database. We have access to all of the publicly available sanctions databases, but also we're working with UControl as well, because they have a sanctions database of their own, and we're looking at the persons of significant control in the UK as well, to see if there are any gaps in the information, so to speak. So to see if there are sanctioned individuals and businesses carrying on in the UK, because ultimately any kind of reparations, a portion of that is going to come from seized assets, and if the sanctions in the UK aren't robust enough, then that's going to cause problems. It's my job as an investigator to see any of these discrepancies and to report on them as publicly as I can, to kind of force politicians and policymakers into taking some action on this. So yeah, currently there are about 35,000 persons of significant control from Belarus and Russia and Ukraine. Thousands of them are operating companies which have purely offshore structures, and this is the type of thing that we're going to be looking into over the next 18 months.
Thank you, Ross. Fascinating work, and I hear you have a lot to do. I will open the floor for questions in a moment, so please prepare your questions if you have them. But I will take the privilege of, or use my privilege as a moderator to ask a follow-up question to our panel, which is this. As you obviously know, Russia can and will use anything against us, so especially in the current situation of the war against Ukraine. Is that a consideration when you are doing your research or when you are reporting? So like, what is Russia going to do with this information if we publish things that may not shed a good light on our government or on certain organizations? How do you deal with that?
Okay, I'll start then. So yes, of course, that is something that we consider because right now Ukraine is at the stage of the full-scale war with Russia. Russia uses its political and media warfare against Ukraine. So that is something to consider. However, so there are a few aspects to that. First, my personal stance on it is that you shouldn't really focus on how Russia would perceive that and use this information, because Russia could use and turn into propaganda anything. It doesn't really matter what you do. If they want to, they will. So I don't think it should be like a focus of your attention. I think what journalists in Ukraine should place their focus on is rather how to better serve their audience, providing them with the information they need, with the information they have the right to know, and also how to ensure that there is accountability and transparency, and how to also ensure that democracy is preserved amid the war and is in place. So I guess that should be the primary focus. But I won't hide from you that, of course, when Russia invaded full scale, Ukrainian authorities introduced some decrees on that limited, to an extent, freedom of speech in Ukraine. It sounds a little bit more, concerning than it is, but there are some limitations in place. For example, you cannot name the, on paper at least, but people normally do violate this rule. You cannot name the place of where the battle is unfolding, and you cannot name the commanders who are like Ukrainian commanders participating in that. That's just one example, but there is a list of some rules, and that is of course something to also, how Ukraine is. Framing it, it is something to tackle Russian propaganda, so to protect Ukraine's media space from intervention from Russia's side, which is a fair point. But it also kind of, here we are, Ukrainian journalists, at a place where we have some limitations imposed on the governmental side, and we have also Russia wanting to use this information. But I guess, once again, just to highlight that there are these concerns and challenges, but the primary purpose is your reader and your audience. And even though one side, which is Ukraine, wants to withhold some information from you, while another side, Russia, wants to get this information, you kind of, your major role is to ensure that the information is the information which is relevant and necessary in a democratic society to be revealed should be revealed and should be served to the reader.
Great, thanks.
May I add something?
Sure.
Thank you. We at Biggest Info don't even think about Russian, because who trusts Russia? And we yes. Russia has done to Ukraine so many terrible things that it is impossible to make something worse with Russian propaganda to Ukraine, I think. But what we are thinking about is Ukraine, and we think about saving money. So if the idea of our organization is to save budget money and to make changes for better, yes. So if we see that we can save money publishing this story, or we can change the situation for better, we will publish it. And it is the only question if it will be useful for Ukraine. That's answer.
Great, thank you. Ross, anything you would like, or shall I open the floor?
Well, I mean, we have a pretty poor relationship with the Kremlin. We're an undesirable organization. Our lead Russia investigator can't return to Europe due to threats to his life. Elliot got sued by Prigozhin personally. So yeah, we're beyond the stage where we're worried about how they might react to us. They're pretty openly hostile.
Right. I see several people. I see the lady over there in the grey. Yes, you. There's a mic next to you.
Thank you. It's very interesting. I have two short questions. First is how happened with the Ukrainian oligarch? How do you research about their corruption? And secondly, you are a journalist. You find a corruption case. I don't know, institution or private society. How for procedure do you have? How to take to the justice these people? You must make a complaint. Where, with the institution? How is the way to solve or to take to justice the corruption in this case?
Thank you. Would you like to respond to this, or shall I take several questions?
No, I think I will try. Thank you for these questions. About oligarchs, I think their influence in Ukraine now are much more less than before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. We don't see them influencing on state enterprising, and we know that there is prosecution cases against Kolomoisky, and previously we saw some steps taken by the administration of our president Volodymyr Zelensky. He tried to establish oligarch database list. Yes, so I think it is the answer on your question. And one more option, they lost some of their assets because of the war. So because of the missiles hit their plants and so on. So the answer is their influence is much more or less than before.
I saw the lady over there, and you. Yeah.
Hi.
Can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, one more. Lesya Petrovich, WWF Ukraine. And my question is, we were suggested to start project about anti-corruption in environmental protection sphere, but we never did something like that. So what you can suggest for NGOs who would like to start project about anti-corruption in their sphere of activities, from what to start? and how to ensure security for their workers, because it can be dangerous work, like that investigate something and publish it and so on.
Thank you. Would you, Lisa or Anna?
Any environment specialists on the panel?
About environment, it's about from what to start. Different NGO would like to start such project, anti-corruption project, or investigate in their sphere of activity.
Okay.
From what to start?
I
and
can try to take
how
this
to
one.
ensure security for workers?
Security for workers. Okay. So I would start with trying to find the right people and to engage with the right team. Trying to find like-minders who think the way you think and who you can rely on, because in investigations it's really important, and especially when it comes to your security concerns. So I would maybe also collaborate with somebody abroad. So it's a cross-border story where you can have people in different places, which is also something to ensure your security. That's the way to look at it. Also, I would involve a strong supervisor to this project, somebody that can have your back and that can, you know, provide you with this security. Of course, it's important to secure your, you know, your gadgets. Well, that's not a security training, but I guess you know what to do to make sure that your connection is safe, your conversations are private, and nobody is listening to them, etc., etc. So I guess these are major points that I would make. Of course, maybe finding some funding for this project, and also from an organization that, in the worst case scenario, could help you out with relocation if there is a security concern, if there is a security threat, so they can provide you with some sort of cover for the time being while you need to, you know, to lay low. I can only here, I guess, provide a little bit of my personal experience while we were working on this story. Wasn't environmental, but was an international legion. There were some security concerns, and we addressed those, I guess, quite fine, because we had a plan on what to do. We had a relocation plan. So we kind of sit down together and came up with different scenarios of what to do if, because we didn't know. Back then there wasn't that many stories like that. There wasn't many experience to learn from. So I guess just have a plan, or better, a few plans for different situations, different scenarios, and then just proceed with your work. And I wish you good luck.
Thanks, and I'm sure there will be time after the panel to exchange more, if you like.
Sorry, may I add about security?
Yeah.
I think our job now is not so dangerous as somebody may think about it. So we don't receive letters, "I will kill you because of your investigations." We do really need to protect our devices. So you make work with digital consultants on that issue, but that's all.
Great, thanks. I saw two questions on this side of the audience. The gentleman, yes, in the grey sweater. You were first. Yes, you. The mic is next to you.
Okay,
Thank you.
My name is Musa Appelblad from the Brussels Times. I would like to ask a question first about, let's say, the impact of those investigative stories you already have published. You talked quite a lot about that. And I remember there were reports in media some months ago that President Zelensky, that he had fired some senior officials for mismanagement or corruption. So I wonder if it was perhaps thanks to your stories, were you the first to discover them, or was it because of other reasons? And the other question is, you also mentioned, let's say, I missed the first panel, but it was about institutional design. And I think you talked quite also a lot about your cooperation with, let's say, agencies, and you were very, let's say, satisfied with the access to information, and you mentioned those platforms and so on. As you know, there is a very important, let's say, body, and that's the National Audit Office in Ukraine. I mean, the what is called the Accounting Chamber of Ukraine, which according to the European Commission still has, let's say, to increase the capacity and so on. I wonder, what is your opinion about this National Audit Office? Can it play a role? Is it already playing a role in, let's say, the fight against corruption and, let's say, against irregularities in the budget? Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we'll also take the question from the gentleman behind.
Yeah, hi. I have a question for Elisa and for Anna. So you obviously, to have impact, your work needs to have an audience, and the audience needs to respond to your work. So the two questions are: how does the Ukrainian government and the Office of the President respond to your work? And secondly, how do you promote your work internationally to make sure that international organizations are also covering your work and shining a light on what you're uncovering?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can start, and then Elisa will help me out. So basically, yes, we, of course, as an investigative journalists, expect people in power to react to our stories. That's kind of the idea behind it. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they do. We had quite a bad experience with this International Legion story, because when it first got published in August, we didn't receive any reaction, even though we, of course, did send requests for comments to all the relevant institutions. However, it improved with time, and when we published the second story in November, there was a reaction which we perceived as something quite positive. So what happened back then is that when we filed our request for comment to military intelligence, they then quickly, this time, reacted saying, we are launching an internal check into the allegations that you laid out in your request for comment. The check lasted for 3 weeks, as far as we know, and ended up with the military intelligence saying that the results of this check are state secret. So we weren't really lucky this time. But there are other experiences. I guess Elisa will help me to talk about those. Basically, with this story, we didn't receive the reaction from presidential office. Unfortunately, they ignored our request for comment, and the ground forces also didn't react. So yeah, but there is another example, which is questionable in terms of whether it was positive or not. With this another story that Elisa already mentioned, this story is of our colleague who wrote it for Дзеркало Тижня. And that story, published in January, detailed how the Ministry of Defense ordered food for the military at inflated prices, and the prices were inflated 2 to 3 times. So when the story came out, Ukraine's Minister of Defense just returned from Ramstein talks. And he was he was furious about the story. And first, he didn't take it well, this criticism. So he went on Facebook saying that, well, to put it, so he wasn't happy. Let's put it this way. He wasn't happy. He said something that was perceived a little bit like a threat to a journalist. Then he apologized that he didn't mean it. So there was a little bit of, so to say, misunderstanding. But then the problem is that the minister didn't really admit to the fact that there were inflated prices. And then later on, eventually, I think a few days after, the ministry said, yes, okay, there was a problem, we're going to deal with it, and we are going to react. And as Elisa already mentioned, there was a reaction. So this is a good example. When the ministry actually did take, well, there was a public outcry, to be honest, quite. So they were like...
They sacked several employees, yes?
Yeah, so they sacked several employees, one of which was a person signing the contracts, one of which was another guy, but they were in charge of procurement of food for the military. And as well, as Liz already said, they revoked those contracts, which were already signed, and signed new ones with the prices that were already reduced, and the contracts, I think the length of the contracts was also shortened from a year to 3 months. So basically that was the idea behind it. And here we have a good impact of the story that led to changes, led to the fact that public funds, taxpayers' money was saved on these contracts, and the ministry did fire people who they suspected. But there was also, I think, a National Anti-Corruption Bureau is suspecting them of some other crimes. But in any case, there was a reaction. That is something that is important to know, and that is, I guess, a very positive sign that the government does take any criticism quite serious. They don't, shy away from addressing these issues. Of course, it's not ideal. There are still issues, and that's why we are here. We have work to do as investigative journalists, because there are still issues to address. But I guess important thing is that it's not that this journalistic work is ignored. It is taken into account, which is good.
Great. And you want to add?
Elizabeth, I think the answer depends on the on what we expect, because, for example, if we expect prosecuting, it is really easy, because NABU, National Anti-Corruption Bureau, will start their investigations without hesitating if they see that this information suits them, if it is a case of high-level corruption. But if we expect President Zelensky answering and reacting to our investigation, it is a rather difficult task, and I think we should make a huge resonance and a huge noise about this topic to have such reaction.
Thanks. Ross, would you like to say something about the audience and how to reach them?
I'll work this microphone out first. In terms of my own work, we're in quite a good position, because our audience is perhaps a little different to a typical publication that's for instance looking into money laundering. Is perhaps I'm not sure we've ever done like any serious demographic kind of looks at our audience. But I mean, the good thing is that our name carries some weight, and therefore we're able to build relationships with journalists. So, for example, the work we did on Irish limited partnerships last year, we were able to partner with the Times, with the Irish Times, and because of that relationship, we were able to get that story on the front page of the newspaper, and that forces the President and the Prime Minister to comment on it, because now we're working with actual proper journalists who can ask these questions, and then we kind of force them into a position where they have to announce reforms in limited partnership law, which they did last year. So effectively, the way that I use Bellingcat is we have some quite high profile investigations. I can use the kudos from that to go to a journalist or someone who might be able to publish something in print, or go and interview a policymaker and try and get it into the press that way. The other thing as well is that most of our readers, I think, come to us because of their interest in things like the Russia investigations that we've done in the past. So therefore, when we write about other things, it gives us quite a good opportunity to kind of reach this new audience. But The one thing I would say is perhaps the relationship we have with our readers is a little bit different because we show our workings, because we're an open source investigative unit. We encourage people to talk to us directly on social media, to join our Discord, to try and pick holes in our investigations if they can, and to conduct their own investigations. So part of our remit is to have that kind of relationship with our audience, because I guess effectively what we're trying to do is preach this kind of open source gospel to everybody.
That's great. Thank you. I saw there was a question over there.
One comment actually to add to what Anna and Alisa said. The Ministry of Defense investigation and power of investigative media right now during the war, actually it not ended up just with sacking of several employees of the Ministry of Defense, but within 3 weeks Parliament adopted a new legislation that significantly increased transparency of military procurement during the war, which is a huge institutional transformation. And moreover, Ministry of Defense launched several working groups to reform not only procurement but other parts of the defense ministry. They're now heavily headhunting for talents to chair some of most important institutions, and it's a huge shift. Not just some people left or lost their jobs, but great institutional transformation, and that's a real power on investigative media right now.
Thank you. That was a very good, very useful addition to the panelists. We have a few minutes left. Is there any more question from the audience? Ah, several even. So I'll take them probably several at once. Two in the front row, actually. This gentleman over here. Yes.
Thank you. Filip Kanevsky, chairman of Kyiv-based analytical think tank Statewatch. I have a question to Ross. Please explain, how do you estimate influence of Russian oligarchs in your country? How do you think is this influence in your country, and what do you think, or maybe your team or another team in your country try to select and collect information about Russian businesses in your country and connection to oligarchs, to Russian regimes, to Kremlin? Do you have some register, for example, of course, official register, but do you have?
Oh.
Right away. Yeah. Why not?
Hello, my name is Taras Barsovsky. I'm an chief executive editor of the newspaper 20 Minutes, and I have also a question to Ross, and it's very similar to question of my colleague, but I just want to know, maybe you have some thoughts or advices about the policy that had to made by European Commission and also European Union member states for more faster freezing assets and money that belongs to Russian, because as I know that during this year Russians, they are not sleep, they just making a lot of deals to hide those money and property, and a lot of this property just change their owners, and I am very doubting about that. When European Commission and European state will be more working upon this topic, it will be nothing to be frozen. Thank you.
Thanks. Ross?
I'm going to figure this microphone out one day. Okay, so these are really interesting questions. This is exactly what we're looking into at the moment. So first of all, the influence on Russian businesses in the UK. I mean, this is a really complicated issue. So for a start, I mean, as you're all probably aware, London is a place where oligarchs and kleptocrats can run their property empire or buy a football club or kind of hide the proceeds of their slush fund. and the UK's been a fertile kind of bed for all of this kind of behaviour. It's only since, this is my opinion and not the opinion of Bellingcat, it's really only since the invasion that the political will to tackle this has kind of sprang into existence. What we have on Companies House at the moment is the kind of detritus of all of this behaviour. So what you have are thousands of kind of abandoned shell companies that have been used in some kind of illicit transaction or another. And what we're getting kind of a drip of at the moment are the occasional articles that come out. So the last one I read, some guy from the Wagner Group is running a Scottish limited partnership. The one before that was there's some Eastern European crypto scam that I've discovered. Why is there a Scottish limited partnership behind it? Luckily, at the moment, the company register is open, so we can do some kind of forensic investigation into this. When I was trying to do the same for Ireland, I had to obtain funding to do that. It cost me about 10,000 euros to look into that. So this is why transparency is quite important, because when we looked into the Irish companies, we found front companies for Russian oil tankers that were moored off the Venezuelan coast, things like that. So that's one aspect to it, and I'm afraid it's going to take years for journalists and civil society to pick this apart. What we can do is we can say publicly, look, how has the UK kind of created this environment? Because effectively what's happening is that money is being siphoned off from Eastern Europe and Russia. This is public money, okay? This is taxpayers' money. It's come through the UK in plain sight. So, you know, the authorities are well aware that this has been happening, and as a consequence of that, the infrastructure of these countries gets weakened, and people, kleptocrats and people like Putin get emboldened, and now we see the consequences of this. And from a journalistic point of view, it's our responsibility to report on this. The other question that you mentioned about assets, Transparency International has just put out quite an interesting report to do with the extent to which offshore companies and kind of suspicious beneficial owners own property in the UK, and how they're circumventing sanctions. So, for example, they will put things in the name of family members and stuff like that, or they will just get a proxy to sign all the forms. What I've noticed looking at the person of significant control data that we have, that, I mean, there are data entry errors in that I've picked up on that could be very serious, because it means that sanctioned individuals get kind of don't get picked up by Companies House. So, in short, there are some significant problems with the infrastructure in the UK that need to be addressed. In terms of sanctions, I could talk for quite a long time, but I'm not going to, because you heard all of this last night, didn't you? Yeah. So yeah, I've heard.
Thank you so much. So we're reaching the end of the panel. I'm sure there are more questions, but perhaps you can use the coffee break to network and get acquainted with our great speakers. I think they are doing great work. It looks like journalists and investigative researchers and civil society are on the ball to researching and tracking corruption and illicit finance and sanctions and whatnot. But I also hear there remains a lot of work to do. So we are happy to know that you are on the job. And thank you for being here with us. Thank you to our audience for your attention and for your great questions. And thank you for RUSI for convening us today. Thank you.